social media accounts at DZJV 1458 sa Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at YouTube. Sakuna, kalamidad at mga di inaasahang pangyayari, kanino ka sisigaw ng tulong? Gising na kaibigan, kaakibat ng pag-iingat ay kahandaan. Makibahagi para di masawi. Makinig sa Kaakibat kasama sina Daniel Castro at Rose Ann Sibag. Lunes hanggang Biyernes, 1:00 ng hapon sa programang Kaakibat. Dito lang sa DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon. Para makilala ang iyong negosyo, halina't magpaanunsyo sa radyo sa DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon. Sa abot kayang halaga, ang budget mo ay hindi masisira. Maririnig ka pa sa Quezon, Cavite, Rizal, Batangas at Laguna kasama pa ang Metro Manila. Para sa karagdagang impormasyon at para maka-avail ng mga swak na advertisement package, tumawag sa 545-2153 o mag-text sa 0932-228-3828. Naghahatid ng napapanahong impormasyon at inspirasyon para sa buong Calabarzon. Tagasulong ng mga proyektong pangkaunlaran para sa katagumpayan ng bawat mamamayan. Himpilang naglilingkod sa Diyos at sa bayan. DZJV 1458 Radyo Calabarzon.
Teaching the Bible is a viewer and listener supported program. In order to help keep it on the air, please go to teachingthebible.net. Hi everyone, I'm Michael Koch. Welcome back to Teaching the Bible. Teaching the Bible is a weekly radio and television program that details and explains the major events that take place in the Bible as I move forward through the Bible each episode. Now, today we're going to finish the book of Ezekiel and we're going to start the book of Daniel. Both Ezekiel and Daniel are major prophets, and a major prophet is a prophet that the book in the Bible is longer. They're just more written about. And the major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. After that comes the minor prophets, and they're not any less important. It's just that the books are shorter. Now, in Ezekiel, what happened in Ezekiel, let me catch up to speed. We started last episode. There are two Babylonian exiles, and the Babylonian exiles were when, because of Judah is continued sinning against God in horrible ways, God took his protection away and allowed the Babylonian pagan nation to come and conquer them and take people away in exile. He allowed that twice as a way to discipline them. But God has, sometimes God uses multiple reasons or gets multiple benefits out of something that he does in an event. Now, one of the reasons why he allowed them to be conquered and take it away is to discipline them so that they return to following God once they see what these pagan people are like that they worship instead of worshiping our God. But a second reason why he allowed the first Babylonian exile to happen was to protect these people. And he told them that in Ezekiel. Basically, he said that, there's going to come a second Babylonian exile because the people back home in Jerusalem, which is the capital city of Judah, are so sinful that I'm going to have to allow the second exile to happen. And it's going to be so devastating with the number of people that are going to be killed. And there's reasons for that, why it's so devastating, because they're burning their children alive to false gods and demons. What they're doing was horrible. But he said the outcome's going to be so terrible. So many people are going to get killed through the sword, through famine, through plague. They're going to be dragged away to Babylon. There's going to be, they're going to burn the city down. That I took this group of people in the first Babylonian exile away to protect them from that. So they're kind of tucked safe away in Babylon from the first exile to protect them from what's going to happen back home in the second, so that at one point there will be people left to bring back to Jerusalem. And this first group that was taken away, God did it for safekeeping, so one day he could bring them back. And all through the book of Ezekiel, basically what is happening is God is informing them on his plans, his present plans, his future plans. He's just telling them all through the book of things he intends to do with the Jewish people so that they know, because this is going to be a group that he brings back. And this group in the first Babylon exile that is in Babylon now from Judah, among them was a priest named Ezekiel. And God made Ezekiel a prophet, and he is the one that is telling them all these messages from God. So that's a quick catch-up of where we're at. And we're going to pick up right after chapter 18 in Ezekiel. Now, God told Ezekiel that if the people of Jerusalem asked him who he thought he was by judging their city, he was to declare to them the sins they had committed against God. This included shedding innocent blood. They were killing their own children as sacrifices to the Baals and other false gods, making idols to defile themselves, treating their parents with contempt, extorting travelers, wronging orphans and widows, despising God's holy things and profaning the Sabbaths, slandering in order to murder, worshiping other gods, very grave sexual immoralities, taking bribes to shed blood, extorting one's neighbor to make financial gain, false prophets conspiring to tell lies to the people, resulting in the loss of life, in giving people false words from God, priests doing violence to God's laws and profaning his holy things, princes destroying lives to get dishonest gain, and many of the people forgetting about God. Excuse me. God sought out a man among them who should build up the wall and stand in the breach before God for the land so that he would not have to destroy it, but God could not find any. As a result of this, they would be profaned by their own doing in the sight of other nations. Jerusalem would be destroyed with the sinners inside of it. And then God's people would know that he is the Lord. That's in Ezekiel chapter 22. And after God told the first group of exiles, Babylonian exiles, about this, right after that, in the 10th month of the 9th year of the reign of King Zedekiah over Jerusalem back home, King Nebuchadnezzar Babylon began his siege of Jerusalem as God said he would, beginning the second Babylonian exile. That's in Ezekiel chapter 24. God then gave Ezekiel a pattern of prophecies to tell the people against nations that harmed Judah and Israel in some way. In all these prophecies, he mentioned the countries or lands which included Ammon, Moab, Seir, Edom, Philistia, Tyre, Sidon, and Egypt. He then told the harmful things that these countries did against Israel and Judah. Next, for each one, he gave a prophecy to each country through the prophet Ezekiel of exactly what kind of tragedy would befall the people of each country because of their evil acts toward Israel and Judah. God would then end each prophecy to each country with this statement: then they will know that I am the Lord. Now I'm going to make some commentary on this because it's important to know, and it's also could be relevant to us in us understanding stuff that might impact us in our own lives from the Bible. So it appears in Ezekiel that God may be using his prophecies about the tragedies that will happen to each country, and then allowing that tragedy to actually happen as God prophesied, as a way for foreign pagan nations to recognize God as a true God. They are told by God what would happen to them in the future by Ezekiel, God's prophet. When that tragedy happened, they would remember that Ezekiel's God said that would happen. They would realize that God was in fact a real God and hopefully follow him as God. Ezekiel chapters 25 to 32. God actually does this numerous times throughout the book of Ezekiel, with prophecies of both good and bad things that will happen to various people in the future. Again, God will give a specific prophecy to a specific group of people in Ezekiel. The prophecy of a future event often ends with God saying, then you will know that I am the Lord. So it appears as though prophecies from God spoken about in Scripture, at least in Ezekiel, when they actually come to pass as God said they would, cause people to whom they happen to realize that God is a true God, and they would come to recognize him and or follow him as God. Now, this is important because if that is a pattern in Ezekiel, it may be a pattern that God used in other parts of the Bible. And we have a lot of unfulfilled prophecies so far, prophecies that didn't happen yet. For instance, almost the entire book of Revelation is in our future. We don't know when it could happen. If Revelation could start 1,000 years from now, it might start today. There are other future prophecies that could unfold at any time. And the pattern is God will say specific things will happen to specific countries or specific world events. And for people who don't believe in God or to believe that our God is a real God, when these things actually happen, they'll come to realize, hey, the God from the Bible said that this would happen, and it happened just as he said it would. He must be a really God, and it would cause them to follow him. So keep that in mind, especially if revelation starts to happen, and it could in our lifetime. Pay attention to the prophecies. All right, now back to the book of Ezekiel. God told Ezekiel to say the following to the house of Israel. And what I'm going to read next could be a prophecy that is unfolding right before our very eyes in the country of Israel today. Okay? And this is what God said. And this is Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 22 to 36. God said, "What I'm about to do for you is not for your sake, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations in which you encountered. I will take you from the nations in which you are dispersed, and I will bring you back to your own land. I will cleanse you from all your idol worship, and I will deliver you from all uncleanliness. I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit within you. I will also put my spirit in you, which will cause you to carefully obey my laws and rules. You will dwell in the land I gave to your fathers, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. I will make your crops abundant, and you will never experience famine again." This is important. When this prophecy that God is speaking about concerning the country of Israel says at this time they will never experience famine again. Now, after the Babylonian exiles, yes, the Jewish people did return to Israel. However, they experienced famines after that in the past. I mean, after Jesus was crucified, shortly after in 70 AD, the Romans came in and basically wiped out the country of Israel. They killed so many people and scattered them, and I'm sure that there was people that were starving because of what happened to them. There was famines. It says in this prophecy, they're talking about a time when Israel will never experience a famine again. And that could be now. The people have returned, and they're doing very well. God, returning to it, God said, "You will hate all of your former ways, and I will cause your cities to once again be inhabited, and your waste places to be rebuilt. Desolate land will become less vegetation, which will astonish the world." That's happened since 1948. 1948, Israel was by the United Nations, was turned back into the country of Israel, didn't exist for almost 2,000 years, and it was dry desert land. Well, the Jewish people, when they returned to Israel, realized how to set up fantastic irrigation systems, and now Israel is a lush place, and it astonished the world. It says, "Your people will increase in the land like a flock, and your land will be full of its people. Then the nations around you will know that I am the Lord when they see your deserted and destroyed homeland completely rebuilt." And that's what the Jews have done since they returned in 1948. That could be a prophecy that is unfolding in the country of Israel right before our eyes. And again, that's Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 22 to 36. Now, the next prophecy in Ezekiel is definitely for the end times. In the future, this didn't happen yet, and I'll show exactly why. In this prophecy, and it's Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 15 to 28, God informed the prophet Ezekiel of things that would happen far in the future. God said he would one day reunite the tribes of Israel and the tribes of Judah. God would take the people of Israel who were scattered among the nations, and he would bring them back to their own land. That happened in 1948. Okay. It happened other times too, like after the Babylonian exiles, but I'm going to point out something very interesting soon. God said he would make them one nation in their land, and one king would be king over all. There would no longer be two nations, Israel and Judah, but they would be one nation again, just the nation of Israel. They would no longer defile themselves with idols and detestable practices. God would cleanse them and protect them from all their backslidings. They would be God's people, and he would be their God. Now, this is the part I'm going to read next. That's definitely didn't happen yet. David, King David, would once again be king over them, and they would have one shepherd. It says in the end times when Jesus comes back, he's bringing King David with him. Well, at the moment, King David did not return back from heaven and is not ruling Israel at the moment. This is a future event. This didn't happen yet. Also, it says God's sanctuary would be in their midst forever. God's dwelling place would be with them, and God would make them a covenant of peace with them. God's sanctuary would be in their midst forever. That's not the case right now. Their temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. It hasn't been rebuilt yet. And once it does get rebuilt, it's going to be rebuilt and it's never going to get torn down again. That didn't happen yet. So this is a future prophecy. Again, that was Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 15 to 28. God then gave Ezekiel a vision of the complete design of a future temple of Israel and instructions on how worship would be conducted in it. He also gave instructions to Ezekiel about how the future land of Israel should be divided as an inheritance among the 12 tribes of Israel. The new name of the land at that time would be "The Lord is there." And that's Ezekiel's chapter 40 to 48. Okay, that's the end of Ezekiel, and we're going to get into the last major prophet before we get into the minor prophets. And this is the prophet Daniel. Now, there's a lot of things that happen in Daniel, but there's one overarching main point of the book of Daniel. And the main point of the book of Daniel is God used Daniel and his 3 friends who were captured exiles of Judah, taken to Babylon as captives. He used them in Babylon as captives to evangelize 2 pagan empires of Babylon and the empire of Media-Persia. God used these 4 young captives from Judah, Daniel's 3 friends, to teach 2 pagan empires about our God, have their kings become aware that our God is a true God, and tell the people that our God must be worshipped as God. That is the overriding principle in Daniel. Okay, now what is Daniel about? It sounds like, I'm not exactly sure, but Daniel might have been like a contemporary of Ezekiel, because Daniel, like Ezekiel, was captured along with the rest of the Jewish people in the first Babylonian exile and taken to Babylon. And so he was with this group of people during the first Babylonian exile, taken away to Babylon, just like Ezekiel was. Now, Daniel was a teenager when he was taken from Judah during the first Babylonian exile of Judah and Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, Chaldea. The terms Babylon, or Babylonians, and the Chaldeans, they're interchangeable. It's the same group of people. Daniel was taken away to Babylon and was a prophet there to Jewish people across the reign of many kings and through the transition of the Babylonian Empire to the Media-Persian Empire. Daniel was doing great things from the time he was a teenager, arriving as a captive in Babylon, Chaldea, until he was still there as a prophet in his 80s. Now, again, the main theme of Daniel is God used these 4 captive boys from Judah to show 2 pagan empires who the real God is and have them worship him as such. But there's 4 other more minor themes in the book of Daniel. And they are, first one, is Daniel and his 3 friends remained faithful to following God in the face of extreme persecution for doing so. On 2 occasions, Daniel's 3 friends were commanded by the kings of Babylon and Persia to either stop worshiping our God or to start worshiping a false Babylonian god. If they did not, they would be put to death. On both occasions, Daniel and his 3 friends told the Babylonian and Persian kings they would not stop worshiping our God, or they would not worship a false pagan god no matter what the kings did to them. On both occasions, the kings of Babylon and Persia attempted to publicly execute them for not renouncing their faith in our God. On both occasions, our God publicly saved Daniel and his friends before the kings of Babylon and Persia and the Babylonian and Persian people. And this helped teach the pagan kingdoms about our God. A second major theme in Daniel: God did miracles through the unshakable faith of these 4 captives to bring 2 godless pagan kingdoms to knowing and following our God. When Daniel and his 3 friends first arrived as captives in Babylon, it was a completely pagan kingdom. The pagans there followed false gods and did not follow our God at all. The several miracles that God did through Daniel and his 3 friends' faith caused King Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom Babylon to know that our God is the one true God and follow him. And the same thing happened later to King Darius of the Persian Empire. God used 4 foreign exiled boys and then later young men to bring 2 pagan empires to know and follow our God. Third main theme of Daniel: because of the unmovable faith in God of Daniel and his 3 friends, and because God was visibly with all 4 of them, they were all elevated to high-ranking positions in the Babylonian Persian empires. Daniel may have been elevated to second in command over the entire Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, because the king could see that God was clearly with Daniel due to his obedience to God. A similar thing happened earlier with Joseph and the Pharaoh, if we remember. In fact, if you look for it, you'll see that several events in Daniel's life are similar to the events in Joseph's life. See if you can find the similarities between Daniel and Joseph, what happened in their lives when we go through the book of Daniel. Now, the fourth main theme, it's actually five. So, fourth main theme is Daniel gave power to interpret the dreams of the kings of the Babylonian Empire, similar to Joseph and the Pharaoh. Now, fifth main theme is there's a lot of prophecies in Daniel about the future. And some of them I'm going to go over, and some of them I'm going to explain. However, there are a bunch of prophecies in Daniel that are symbolic, where they use symbolism about future things. And honestly, I'm not going to cover those. You need to read those yourself, because I don't feel qualified to interpret them, and I'd rather not specifically go over and try to explain them and get it wrong. You know, I'd rather just not even kind of go over them. So there's a lot of very symbolic prophecies about things that are going to happen in the future. So please read those by yourself in Daniel. Now, there are many events and dynamics that take place in the book of Daniel. There's a lot of stuff going on there. But again, one of the major themes that connects the many events in the book of Daniel is God used Daniel and his friends, his three friends, to show the mighty pagan kings of Babylon and Medo-Persia that the God of Judah is the God of gods, and to humble and convert these pagan kings and their kingdoms under submission to our God. Main theme again, God used 4 teenage captive exiles to teach 2 pagan empires who is the real God and to worship him as such. So let's get right in. That was an overview of Daniel and an explanation of the major themes of it. Let's get right into the book of Daniel. When God allowed the Babylonians or the Chaldeans to conquer the kingdom of Judah because his people kept going against what God told them to do, the people of Judah were taken away as captives to the land of Babylon. When they got there, the most promising of these exiles were educated for 3 years in the customs of the Chaldeans. After that, they would stand before the king to see if they were worthy to become part of the Chaldean or Babylonian society. During these 3 years, they were given daily servings of Chaldean food and drink. That's Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. A young man from Judah living as a Babylonian exile was named Daniel. Daniel refused to eat the king's food and drink because some of the food he was given was prohibited by God for the Jews to eat. The king's servant said to Daniel that if he did not eat the king's food given to him, he would become weak and sick, and they would get into trouble because it would look like that they were not feeding Daniel like they were ordered to. Daniel told the king's servants to test him and his 3 friends for 10 days about this matter. He told them to just give them vegetables and water for these 10 days. At the end of 10 days, the king's servants would inspect their health. If they were healthy, then Daniel asked permission to not have to eat the king's food, which was prohibited by Jews to eat, some of it. But Daniel said if they were not healthy, then they would eat the king's food and no longer refuse to eat it. So the king's servants agreed to this. Now, at the end of 10 days, Daniel's 3 friends were healthier than all the other young men there. God was taking care of them because they followed God. And it says, and as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel in particular had understanding in visions and dreams. That's Daniel chapter 1, verses 17. Now, this was discovered about them by King Nebuchadnezzar when they stood before the king to be tested after their 3 years of training in Chaldean culture. The king often asked them for advice on important matters, and their advice is better than that of the other men in the kingdom. It's Daniel chapter 1, verses 18 and 21. Now, at one point, King Nebuchadnezzar had a very troublesome dream. He put out an order to all the magicians, enchanters, and sorcerers in the kingdom of Babylon that he wanted them to not just interpret what his dream meant, but to also tell him what his dream was, secretly, without him revealing his dream to them. If they couldn't tell him what his dream was, he ordered them to be put to death. And they panicked, and they said, "King, how can we know what your dream is unless you tell us? Well, if you tell us, we'll tell you what the interpretation is, but you got to tell us what the dream is." He said, "Well, what kind of psychics and mediums are you if you can't tell me what your dream is? I think you'd just be making it up." any interpretation up. If you really have special powers, you'd be able to tell me what my dream is. And if you can't, then you're a phony. I'm going to have you put to death. Well, they panicked. No one could tell the king what the king's dream was, except Daniel could. Because Daniel was obedient to God, God allowed Daniel to tell the king what his dream was, and also its interpretation. Now, Daniel revealing the king's dream and its interpretation to him was completely accurate. King Nebuchadnezzar was blown away. Now, pay attention to what happened now. Remember, Daniel is just a teenager, captive exiled, facing the king of Babylon, the most powerful empire in the area who people thought was a god. The Bible says, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and an incense be offered up to him. What God did through Daniel blew the king away so much, the King Nebuchadnezzar started worshiping Daniel, because Daniel could tell him what his secret dream was. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. This was unheard of for King Nebuchadnezzar to do so, because he and his followers thought that he himself was a god. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar was paying homage to Daniel, who was just a young captive exile in his empire. The abilities God gave Daniel astounded the king. God was using Daniel to show King Nebuchadnezzar who the only one and true God was. King Nebuchadnezzar now knew and was in awe of our God, but not enough to worship him as God yet. Nebuchadnezzar still had some learning to do, and our God would use Daniel and his three friends to teach him about our God. Because Daniel was the only man who could tell King Nebuchadnezzar what his hidden dream was, the king made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. This is a lofty position given to a young exile captive who refused to follow the gods of Babylon and insisted on following his own God. When Daniel was given this lofty position as ruler, he appointed 3 of his friends who were fellow exiles from Judah as rulers over all the affairs of Babylon province. These 3 young friends of Daniel were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's in Daniel chapter 2. These 3 young men would also be used by God to show King Nebuchadnezzar who the one true God is. We're going to stop there, and we'll pick up with Daniel on our next episode. Teaching the Bible is a listener and viewer supported program.
Naghahatid ng napapanahong impormasyon at inspirasyon para sa buong Calabarzon. Tagasulong ng mga proyektong pangkaunlaran para sa katagumpayan ng bawat mamamayan. Himpilang naglilingkod sa Diyos at sa bayan. DZJV 1458